when crap hits the fan in the world, people need places to go. And, we can't create them fast enough. We can't create them big enough for the, if it is 10% of the world's population that goes, hey, I want to go there, we're never going to be big enough to handle 10% of the population. But the people that are making that choice now to have that plan A or plan B will be able to go there. I think we're looking at the fall of an empire. Right? I think the U.S. the Western world is going to collapse, just like the Greek, the Roman, the Ottoman, the British empires.
This year we've had a lot of new people coming to the conference that haven't been before. Like the last couple of years, you get to know who the main faces are. But I'd call you one of the new people.
One of the newbies now.
One of the newbies that I've never heard of before. So how about, can you give us a bit of a 101 on who you are?
All right. Well, my name is Patrick Hiebert. I'm originally Canadian. I was in the software industry. I have a computer science degree, and in the 90s, dating myself a little here, but in the 90s created some software companies and for the energy industry, and was lucky enough to sell those. They were acquired, and got a little bit of time off while my kids were still young, which was nice. So kind of did a lot of traveling with them. I spent quite a bit of time in Latin America. And then as my daughters got older, my son and I lived on a boat for a while, and really learned a lot about freedom and just self-sustainability. And that's ultimately why I wanted to kind of take that to land. And of course, when you're trying to create power, energy, and out of solar systems and stuff like that, it's a lot nicer to be closer to the equator than up in northern Canada. So, ended up moving to that region of the world and getting things done there. So that's the very, quick version of it, I guess.
And how do you fit into the Free Cities spectrum then?
Well, our Veritas Village community, we created a company, couple layers, I guess. The Autris is the overall holding entity. It's a public company, AUTR, on the OTC market in the U.S. And it owns a company called EcoVillages, which is creating these communities. And the communities are called Veritas Villages. And the Veritas Villages are based on something we created a number of years ago called our FIRST philosophy, and that's FIRST, stands for Freedom, Independence, Resilience, Sustainability, and Transparency. It's a lot of words, a mouthful, but you kind of get the idea from the wording there. So, we've been creating communities for a couple decades. When I moved down to, first of all, to Nicaragua in Central America, and then other areas in Central America, but I was kind of a little bit like a kid in a candy store, and I bought some land. I was used to the price. I was living on Vancouver Island and in our boat on the ocean, and the land up there was very expensive. It's kind of like the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And to get beachfront land was crazy expensive. So when I got to Central America, it was like I can get acres on the beach for the same price as a tiny little postage stamp piece in British Columbia and Vancouver or Victoria. And so I bought land and kind of fell into being a developer because I had the software background. I went, I can put up a website and I'll just be a developer. Right? And I started selling properties. Well, 20 years later, after a lot of going through the school of hard knocks, kind of ended up creating communities. And then, it was evolutionary, I guess, starting with communities where typically, more retiree type places. And then especially when COVID hit, COVID really kind of changed our demographic entirely to young people in their 20s, 30s with families, young families, digital nomad types. COVID taught a lot of people that they could work from home, forced them to work from home, first of all, and then realized they could work from home. And then at that point you realize, my home doesn't have to be anywhere in particular. So then they started looking at better climates. So if you were living in Detroit, Michigan, or Norway or something, you could go, I'm going to go somewhere into the tropics and have a nice place to live and do my same work. And so we got a lot of that. And then, of course, myself included, kind of a very libertarian style of life, and didn't really like the way governments handled lockdowns and mandates and that sort of thing. So it really shifted our communities from, sort of freedom-oriented communities anyway, to very seriously built on that kind of FIRST philosophy.
And you learnt about the freedom aspect from experience, not you weren't predisposed to all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think I was. I just wasn't aware of how, how libertarian. I came from Canada. It's a very, it's gone crazy in the last few years, but even back 20 years ago, the taxes were extremely high. I wanted to get away from a lot of the stuff that was going on in big government, big taxes, and just have a more self-sustainable life. And like I mentioned, living on the boat, you don't have a long extension cord out into the ocean, so you have to produce your own power. You desalinate your water. This was on the ocean, so it's salt water. So you desalinate the water and create your own potable water and all those sorts of things, so that you catch fish and eat sea asparagus and whatever else you can find out there. It was, in the beginning, it was a game. My son and I would be, how many weeks can we go without really, eating the pork and beans out of the can kind of thing, which was our backup plan all the time. So that's how it kind of started. And then we realized, you can be self-sustainable out here, and you can be much more self-sustainable on land. So we wanted to move that whole concept to land, and in the tropics you have more solar power and the wind power and different things like that. And it's important to have the energy that, we're building luxury communities. I mean, we're not building, we're not living in a yurt out in the forest, which some people think, because we mistakenly probably chose the name for a company of EcoVillages, so they think this is a very hippie lifestyle commune.
It does sound like that. Yeah, it does.
It's not, though, and we've toyed with changing our name many times. But we're recognized as that now, so we kind of stuck with
EcoVillages, what about that?
Yeah, that might be, just add the N.
Just adding an N changes it completely, doesn't it?
Well, I'll give you credit if that happens.
So this is the question I wanted to know then. Do you have any aspect of sovereignty other than energy sovereignty? Do you have any ideas or expectations of sovereignty in any of these places?
Well, we're doing this all in Latin America, currently in Central and South America, and another reason other than climate and things like that we chose was because there's a huge shift going on in the Western world from capitalism sort of to socialism, I think, and certainly in Canada you can see that happening. The U.S. now with the elections, and Latin America is going the other way, right? They've struggled with socialism and communism. You see Venezuela still struggling with it. Other countries like Ecuador and the Nicaragua and those countries have been there and done that, and they're learned from it, and they've switched much more to capitalism and then culture. The Latin American culture is very live and let live. In Canada, we saw during COVID, the government break into churches and arrest priests and preachers and whatever pastors for, having a congregation during COVID. Right? Well, that would never, ever happen in Latin America. That's just not their style. And so when we pick private land, a big chunk of private land in these countries in Latin America, we know that we shut the gate and we're self-sufficient. We have community orchards and gardens and stables and livestock and everything, and tilapia pond and all sorts of things in there for food. And we have our own on-site water sources that are crystal clear water from a mountain-fed spring. And all those things mean that the next event that happens, we expect there will be another one. I don't know if it'll be like another virus. Probably, my theory is it'll probably be a climate change related thing, where it's going to be another fear-mongering thing, and we'll just shut the gate. And in Latin America, the police aren't going to come in, the military's not going to come. They're just going to be, all right, there's a bunch of gringos living in this community, and we're happy with that. That's fine. Right? So part of the chosen location for these things, these Veritas villages, are because of the culture. And
do you have any aspirations to talk to states and governments and try and get special economic designations or anything like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I tag along with Alex Voss and the Tipolis guys, and we've talked to many countries. I've been lucky enough to have some family connections in the countries as well, in the upper echelons of the families. So, we're pushing very hard to have self-governance inside these communities. But we've kind of chosen that there's a spectrum to get there, right? I mean, we have to, rather than sitting around and complaining about we can't get this right off the gate, we're going to just do it, and we're going to have as much as we can. And for instance, our Veritas village in Panama, in the Coronado area, there's something called a PH designation, which is HPR. It stands for Horizontal Property Regime. It doesn't sound very pleasant, but it really is where you can kind of make your own rules for the communities. Now, you can't take it as far as having, your own military or whatever, and those sorts of things, but, working with Tipolis a lot on that sort of stuff, and we've traveled to many different countries to talk to them about it. So I'm always helping to push that envelope, but in the meantime, also creating the most freedom-oriented communities we can.
So, and do you attract freedom-minded people to these places, or is that not important? Oh, you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We try to make it clear that we're not going to vet people and say that, you shouldn't live here because you won't be happy, but it's very like-minded, libertarian, freedom-oriented, liberty-oriented people for sure. And most people, I don't pull any punches when I'm talking on webinars or podcasts, and they very quickly realize if you're a radical leftist, you're probably not going to enjoy living in one of these communities because you'll be kind of out on your own, right? But it's amazing the like-mindedness of people from around the world and on freedom-oriented communities. The other day again in our one Panama community, we have a couple there, and there was 10 different couples, and some with families and some older and some younger, but 10 different couples in a row that were from different countries. So it was Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Scotland, UK, Canada, US, New Zealand, and Australia. So 10 in a row weren't from the same place, but they were all like-minded in terms of wanting to find a place to have if not a plan A, then at least a plan B place to go to.
Is that your what's your kind of main demographic? Digital nomads or families or?
Well, now it's really the freedom-oriented folks, right? Like they're people that whether they're living in, well, I'm Canadian, like I said, and we get a lot of Canadians recently. With the government they have now, a ton of people want to get their money out, get themselves out. The U.S. for sure is because they all feel, a lot of people feel like the banks are going to collapse ultimately with money printing and everything that's going on. So that's definitely, it used to be a demographic of, I would say age-wise, would be people in their 40s that were sort of thinking, what I'd call pre-retirement. They're thinking, okay, I'm going to retire in 15 years or something like that, and I'm going to get a home in a community that I can rent out and have some rental revenue for the next 10, 15 years, and then I'm going to move into it myself as a retirement home in a nice tropical climate. And that still happens, but that's a small portion of our communities now. It's like we literally have people in their 20s, couples in their 20s and 30s with 2-year-old babies and stuff like that moving in, and
they're living full time.
Yeah, they're moving in full time. So wow. And they're lucky enough to have the kinds of jobs that they can. That, like I said, those kind of jobs expanded greatly when COVID forced people to do that, right? Or the governments forced people to do that. So if you're an architect from Sweden or something, and you can live in a very inexpensive country with great climate, its cost of living is very low in Latin America, and you can retain your clients from around the world, you're getting paid roughly the same. For me in Canada, I was getting taxed almost 70% after income tax, and they have the general services tax. They have a bunch of taxes, but so if you take a simple number like $100,000 annual income and 70% of it's gone, well, you can easily live off of $30,000 in Latin America and live like a king. And so imagine if like in Panama, there's lots of ways to create companies that are and income that are tax free. So if you can retain, I always say, if you can retain a third to, maybe 40% of your original income, you'll live double the lifestyle in Latin America.
Wow. And do people buy or rent mainly? Mostly
buy. We keep, some people will buy in multiple communities that we have. So we have communities on the Caribbean coast. So if you're like diving, you could go spend some time there. If you like surfing or just the Pacific ocean, a little wilder with the waves and things like that, then you can have a community there, or the community in Coronado in Panama that I've been talking about is in the highlands, so the temperature's a little cooler. Living on the beach is very warm in Latin America and Central America anyway. So people tend to have 2 or 3 homes, right? They'll live on the Caribbean for 4 months, live on the Pacific Ocean for 4 months, and live in the highlands for 4 months, and just rent the other 2 homes out, for instance. And it partly because the homes are so inexpensive. We've done, on some of our presentations, it shows like here, you could own these 3 or 4 beautiful modern homes on the beach and in the highlands for the same price of one crappy home in, San Francisco or something. Right? So.
I'm almost certain, yeah. And architecturally, I'm just trying to get a sense of these places. Are you in any school of thought or in particular? I mean,
we have a wide range of design styles and both size and style. Like we kind of introduced tiny homes to Latin America 10 some years ago or so. And they were very popular because in that climate, you really only use your bedroom and your kitchen, and even your kitchen's usually outdoors because it's beautiful all year round. So you never have to worry about that, and your house can be a lot smaller because you're spending all your time outdoors. And for me, I watch sports a lot, and I watch it outside, right? The big screen outside, and not spending my time inside. And so but we also have people that are having 6-7 bedroom mansions in these communities. And what's interesting is the people with the tiny homes, the people with the middle-sized homes, the people with the mansions all get together. We have a welcome center of some sort or restaurants in the communities, and they get together and have a glass of wine and watch the sunset together. And the beauty of it, they're all like-minded in terms of liberty-oriented, and it doesn't matter what the size of their home is or whatever. That's not like, you're not in my level or something like that. It's a lot of fun. In fact, we get so many comments. I love it because people come there and they'll just say, I've been censored and canceled in every conversation. My family won't talk to me, right? And all those sorts of things. We all, in the liberty world, we all get a little bit of conspiracy theory against us. So they're all just happy that they can sit down and have a conversation where they don't have to feel like they're biting their tongue all the time about what they're saying. So.
Yeah, I know what you mean. During the pandemic, me and my family, we went to Spain first, then Mexico. We were kind of escaping as we went. Ended up in Mexico and then El Salvador because of the Bitcoin connection. I'm a Bitcoiner. And
us too. We have, in fact, all the businesses in our communities have to use Bitcoin.
How so?
I mean, if you're selling if you're a restaurant or you're a chiropractor or whatever you are, you got to accept Bitcoin.
As in, you have to because so many people use it, or you enforce that.
It's one of the rules.
Really?
We don't really put rules on a freedom-oriented community, but that's one of them. So.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that one.
And we actually designed a community. It hasn't been built yet, but in El Salvador too. And I'm a huge Bitcoiner as well. So we were the first company in Latin America to sell a home as a title as an NFT, which I thought was kind of cool. I mean, it was just amazing how quickly it happened, and everybody got paid at once, and there was no reason for escrow or anything. And I think the whole transaction to sell a home was 8 cents.
Really?
So it was.
A
little tangent there, but.
Well, no, I'm already excited by that tangent. So you can use whatever currency you want, but you have to offer the option to receive Bitcoin.
Exactly. So in Panama, they have their own currency called the Balboa, but it's tied to the U.S. dollar. So you can use everybody in Panama uses U.S. dollars. But in our communities, you have to be able to accept Bitcoin as well. So you could, pay with Lightning or whatever. And so it's, it's kind of like making mini El Salvadors where we can. And I'm a big fan of Bukele and El Salvador, and I was there in the days that they switched over September 7th, I think.
Yeah.
So, it was fun to go to McDonald's and buy a Big Mac with sats, and so.
Have you been there recently?
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago. So.
And what can you give me a kind of overview of your feelings as a Bitcoiner about what's going on there at the moment?
Well, I think they've done two amazing things. I think Bukele's a rock star when it comes to two things, and that's obviously adopting Bitcoin and totally destroying crime. Basically, it's one of the I think it just surpassed Canada as the safest country in the Americas. One of the two at least, and. Unfortunately, and I think they can still, it's not too late and they can work on this, but they don't have a lot of the steps in between. I mean, they went from here to there, like right across, huge jump to adopt Bitcoin and that sort of thing. But they don't really have any citizenship or residency by investment. We were just there talking with the government a couple of weeks ago, and trying to explain the concepts of residency by investment. It's like, you guys have adopted Bitcoin. Do you know how many people around the world would just love to buy a place here, but they want residency. They want a plan B. They want a place to go to. And I would like to build a community there, right? So we've designed one that hasn't been built yet, but this is one of the issues is it's difficult to say, okay, buy your home in El Salvador when you don't have the ability to get residency. I mean, you can get a temporary residency for 1 year, and it's a work permit basically, but it's not the ultimate goal.
I thought they were doing that.
They have a $1 million Bitcoin residency, and that's really.
So you need to give them $1 million worth of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
right. Or not give it to them, but that's an investment thing, right?
Well, yeah, but that's pretty pricey. I mean, certainly there's a lot of Bitcoin billionaires around, but that's still a big number. Whereas in Nicaragua the price is $30,000, in Honduras it's $50,000, in Panama it's $200 for friendly nations visas. All the countries surrounding them have these pretty amazing investment residency programs that you can, usually after 5 years of having a residency, you can get the citizenship and the passport. But, unfortunately at this point, Salvador's kind of missing that.
Presumably Bukele's idea was he wants really top-notch people.
Yeah.
Or do you think, or was it short-sightedness? I don't know.
Well, I don't really know either. I think sometimes he maybe hangs around with people in the Bitcoin billionaire space and doesn't realize there's this world out there that might not have that much. But it's a good start, I think, and I'm sure they're now we spoke to a lot of government lawyers while we were there. They're kind of opened their eyes, like, we didn't know this was a thing. And it's like, you guys should travel a little. You should get around, because it's a real thing for citizenship and residency by investment is a big part of our business too. Like, people, they want to live in beautiful communities with nice homes and in a beautiful climate, but they also want that Plan B residency. If they know if we sold people a home in Panama, again, use that as an example, and they couldn't get residency, well, what kind of Plan B is that, right? You show up and then 3 months later your 90-day visa runs out, you have to leave. Well, COVID took a little longer than 3 months. So
Do you happen to know whatever happened to Bitcoin City, the plan?
Yeah,
is it still alive?
It's still a plan. We talked about that a bit too while we were there. It's not moved. The whole Bitcoin bonds and Bitcoin City thing hasn't moved as fast as I think Bukele wanted it to. He had some bad timing, right? When he announced Bitcoin and then went from whatever $60,000 worth to 14 or something, and everybody, and we're still working on other countries around that region to adopt Bitcoin as well. Easier today than it was 2 years ago, right? But unfortunately, at that time, the other presidents around around him were just kind of laughing like, what an idiot, right? Why would you do that? You just destroyed your country. And now they're all going, oh my God, we should have been doing it too.
I was going to say, I would imagine that the lesson is harder and stronger now.
Absolutely.
I would have said they looked at it and they can no longer laugh at him.
Yeah.
On those grounds anyway, because it will happen again, obviously.
Yeah.
Presumably. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my prediction for Bitcoin is that it's going to go up, but in the long run, I don't think there's any choice but for it to go up, and he'll continue to look better and better. And they, and I like the fact that he's got the gonads to double down, right? He was buying more Bitcoin while it was falling, and even at its low point. And he said, like, it wasn't huge for a country there, but they were buying a Bitcoin a day or whatever. So it's like, okay, but now what does that add to their coffers, right? So
well, isn't it right? They've managed to pay back all their. Now, which loans would it be? Something to do with the IMF, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, the IMF pretty much told them to get lost, right? It's when they adopted Bitcoin. And a lot of the countries down there, another thing I really like about Latin America, they kind of, in some way, give the middle finger to the IMF and sometimes to the U.S. They've been abused by, these things and kind of held hostage by these things. And, Nicaragua had a bit of a row internally in 2018, and that was because the IMF forced them to increase their pension fund, saying that if you don't, we're not going to loan you money anymore. And they were forced to do it, and then all the people kind of went, this is the government taking advantage of us, and it was like 0.07% or something increase, but it just caused it caused riots, and it was, they remember this stuff, right? They're like, you guys nearly gave us a civil war from your nonsense. So they have a bit of a chip on their shoulder to some of the big organizations like the WEF and IMF.
So back to El Salvador. Can you talk about your plans there, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for property we designed a community with another group that hasn't moved forward, so we're going to be doing our own thing. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that they don't have a good residency program, we're kind of working with them to create one, with myself and the Tipolis folks and others, and that's a big kind of piece of the puzzle. If they have, if they create a really good residency / citizenship by investment, we'll be there in a heartbeat. Right?
So it's purely that you want your clients to be able to stay there. You've got money to build the place and designs and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently purchasing property. Well, we're at the MOU stage of purchasing property in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Argentina. I'm a huge fan of Milei in Argentina as well. And obviously, a libertarian president, I'm going to be a big fan of.
Yeah.
And, so those are the countries. We're also going, to countries where people want to go. We're not going to fight. 20 some years ago, I bought the property in Nicaragua. I felt like I was the only guy in Nicaragua that wasn't from Nicaragua. So it was a little bit of a stretch for me to, first of all, I had to explain it's actually a really safe place. I brought my kids here because I did the research, and it's the safest country in the Americas at the time, next to Canada. And Canada's going the wrong way, and these other countries are going the right way. But it was a hard-fought battle to create communities in Nicaragua and convince people to live there. It's the opposite in Panama or Mexico. People are just like, well, where's your property? I want to live there, right? Once they become kind of fans of what we're doing, and then it's just like, I want a place in the Panama one, I want a place in the Mexico one, I want a place in in Argentina. We have a little bit of a different vibe to them, right? So in Argentina, we're going to do more of a vineyard focus one, like one inside a vineyard where you can make your own wine and stuff like that too. So lots of amenities in these communities, so that if you ever do have to shut the gate, basically, there's lots to do.
And when you, in the preliminary stages of designing these, do you ever talk about, special status at that level, or is it always just we're building a physical place?
No, we're constantly talking about the special status, and we're working on ones that I can't talk about quite yet, but hopefully in the next month or two, where we do get kind of special. I mean, those countries are used to special economic zones, so they have their free tax zones, and almost every one of the countries has that. But this is taking it to the next level, right? Where you're having a self-governance, where you can have your own police force and have your government as a service type of thing, and that's a bit of a stretch for them. So, what we're doing right now is basically proving, we've got a really good name in Panama, for instance, that we're proving to how popular it is. And this isn't, people, building a tent and not spending any money in the country. They're building $1 million homes, multi-million-dollar homes. They're spending a lot of money in the country. They're starting businesses in the country, and the government's starting to take notice that, oh wow, this is actually like you're creating something here. And so, yeah, now we're starting to get more of their attention. And that was kind of always the chicken and the egg thing, right? It's like, do we keep pleading for them, to give us something and then we'll show you? Or do we show you and see what happens? So we're doing both. We're pleading all the time with the different countries.
And what services do you have to provide? Like, for example, do you go as far as medical and things like that?
Yeah, like in our and like I said, these are evolutionary communities. They, used to be more retirement, kind of 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s-year-old people. And now we actually have schools, coming into the communities, clinics. And we have a long checklist of where we put them. Like a lot of people think, okay, I just want to be secluded in this little community where nobody's near me and all that. But they don't really. After a few months, they go, no, I wish there was like a shopping mall nearby. And so, for instance, the one that we're, very popular one in Coronado and Panama right now is 10 minutes from the town or city of Coronado. So you have movie theaters and great restaurants and, obviously shopping malls and grocery stores and all those sorts of things. But we don't need them. We've got everything we need, but you still want to do that. So, you're living a very quote unquote normal life, and until the next thing happens, and we don't want to wear masks, then the community won't wear masks, right? And if we have to outdoors or outside of the community, then a lot of people just choose.
How do you decide that? Like, how do you decide if everyone doesn't want to wear? I mean, presumably, if you're full of libertarians, no one wants to wear a mask anyway. But do you still go through it? Do you have a platform where you can vote on things?
Well, this is where I think we get interesting, and I don't know of too many other communities in the world that do this. But we're only starting this now. But I've been building these communities for a couple decades, and the angst is always caused by the HOA, the homeowners association, right? You elect or you appoint, or however it becomes, you get a president of the HOA. And their job's impossible. They can't possibly make everybody happy. So some faction of the group is going to be unhappy. So we just said, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to use a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, to run the HOA. And basically, now if you're familiar with DAOs, you can set, okay, maybe you need 70% to be a majority or whatever on this particular issue. So, I think it's pretty common, maybe 5 to 7 thoughts. Like, I can never think of a great example, but like, for instance, we're in our community, people are saying, well, do we want to allow roosters? Everybody's got going to have chickens with laying eggs and stuff like that, but do we want the roosters in there because they wake everybody up in the morning? So, all right, well, let's put that to a vote. It's on a blockchain. It's, transparent. It's very fair. And at the end of the day, what happens is you don't have you can't blame one person. If 70% of your fellow residents in the community has decided to vote, and you wanted roosters and 70% didn't, well, you can only point at them and say, well, I guess I'm just in the serious minority here, and it doesn't create the same annoyance that
animosity.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it, when you say transparent, can you see who's voted how?
Well, that's again, technically yes. That's kind of the T in our first philosophy. Everything's transparent. So if you feel strongly enough about it, but I don't see, like, we have versions of that in other communities we've done where you have kind of an online vote that people can see. It's not quite in a blockchain yet, but I've never seen people go, oh, I can't stand that guy because he voted the opposite way. It's like, all right, well, 50 people voted this way and 50 people voted that way, or 51-49, and it is what it is, and we move on. But it really does cause problems, I found, with when you elect or appoint one person, because then it's human nature to assume they've got an agenda, right? So
they probably have as well,
and they probably do. But even if they didn't, even if they were some kind of altruistic, amazing person, they still can't win, right? So I've had good friends that have been HOA or presidents for condo buildings or whatever, and they're just want to jump off a cliff, right? So,
and did you say that you'd happened upon a threshold of 70% as being a good one?
No, I'm just throwing that out as an example. The community decides that. Well, we're different than almost every other developer too. Developers have a real, I find, kind of a control freak stretch in them. I don't want that angst, right? I don't want to make decisions for the community. I found that even in communities that we started when they were small, maybe 7 to 10 people living in them, or 7 to 10 homes, they were already making good decisions, right? They weren't going to make decisions that were bad for the community. So for me, it's like, why would I want to put myself in that same sort of position as a president of an HOA and say, okay, until we get 80% sold, I'm going to make all the decisions. I don't want that. The day one, and we've been lucky too, because the communities are very popular. This one that I'm talking about in Coronado is brand new, but we only announced, I guess, we got the permitting and we're able to sell homes there a couple months ago, and it's 80 or 90% sold out already. So, we're lucky to be able to just turn it over to the community, and we're freedom oriented. So we believe that I get to meet most of the people, if not all the people that end up living in the communities, and they're all great people. And it's pretty obvious when somebody isn't going to fit, and I'll tell them that. I don't think you're going to be happy here. So.
What have you discovered to be the main problems in this model, and what are the things you come up against the most that you either can't change or want to change or whatever?
Well, I don't think it's a problem, but I think you've got different types of people in the world, and freedom-oriented people tend to be fairly strong-willed and quite opinionated, and they're not sheep. I mean, the reason they're freedom oriented is they're not following, the shepherd everywhere, right? So, sometimes that can cause some pretty interesting clashes between neighbors, right? That they're going to be like, I know I believe this, well, I believe that. But, for whatever reason, the fact that they're kind of like-minded in general seems to work that out. And these communities are not without their issues, but in general, they get resolved a lot better than most.
We know a few people that run dispute resolution platforms and things like that. Do you ever use those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, again, we're working with Tipolis to, help have them, even though we're not a complete perfect version of a self-governance kind of community yet. We're working with Tipolis a lot to help create our governance and our dispute resolution stuff. And so far, knock on wood, we haven't really had to trigger it. We've got kind of on the sideline, we have 7 people as a bit of an advisory group that says, okay, let's look at this. Maybe the DAO doesn't work perfectly in this situation, or maybe we don't want to raise this to a community vote. It's just 2 neighbors not getting along on some reason. And so we try to make that, as best as possible, like a voting of your peers type of thing. But for the most part, we don't get to that situation. So.
And the renewable energy or energy security part of it, what is that? Is that mainly solar, I suppose?
Mostly solar. I'd say 95% solar and some wind generation as well. But the systems have come so far in the last 5 years, probably 2 years. I've been playing with this stuff since the early 90s. It's just, with the battery technology, this panel technology, the inverter technology is amazing. And, even about 2 years ago for this community, we decided, originally we were going to have a grid power run in there and sort of just, be there. Now we don't. We don't have any grid in there at all. It's 100% off grid.
Really?
Even with massive luxury homes running multiple, many air conditioners, multiple fridges and freezers, big screen TVs, everything. The systems are amazing nowadays.
Presumably not all from renewables though.
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. So we have.
That's amazing. How many residents are there in these places?
Well, this one that I'm talking about now is it's not big. It's 90 home sites. So it's it's 50 some acres. We'd like to have. In the home sizes or the lot sizes range from 500 square meters to 2 acres, right? A hectare basically. Depends which unit of measure you like to use. But going back to the solar system, so in the U.S., for instance, a 3 or 4 bedroom home with air conditioning and stoves and fridges and all the type of home leave your doors open and still air conditioning kind of waste of. That'll use, in a warmer climate, that'll use about 30 kilowatt hours per day. Well, we're putting in 60 kilowatt hour systems, so we just basically double it. So it's, I spend a lot of my time playing around trying to kill these systems. It's like I want to be the hardest user of our systems that ever existed, and we've gotten to the point where we can't. And one of the nice things about, like for instance, the community in Panama is we're not too far from the Panama Canal. So all this stuff comes in through the canal, and we just say, we'll take a pellet of that, and it's much less expensive. So all our homes, we create, in this case, we have about a dozen home models that you can choose from, and then it's a freedom-oriented community. You can custom design your own or do whatever you like, but we kind of give people ones that, and most people pick one and then make some modifications to it or whatever. But all the homes, every home in this community comes with a solar system that will be 100% support.
So you're not the energy provider?
No, we've tried to, we did a little experiment in one of our Nicaragua communities where we basically wanted to make a solar farm, and we were the grid for the community. But it's strange, human nature, people like their own systems, right? They didn't like it. So we've gone back to every home has its own system. Nobody can say, hey, John down the street is using more power than I am from this thing, and I'm not getting my fair share. Everybody has a $0 power bill because they all have their own systems. And we just build that into the home, and you don't even know it, right?
What the advantage, I suppose, of having the centralized version, where you're the provider of it, is you could sell it the excess off.
Yeah, you could, and honestly, it would be a lot less expensive because each home has to be built for the worst case scenario. Whereas if you have 100 homes in a community, and at any given time, 10 or 20 of them are on vacation or whatever, they're not using their homes, all that power is not being used, and you can, net configure it together to share.
Do they? I mean, what do the individual houses do with their excess power now?
Nothing, unfortunately. Well,
no one's mining Bitcoin.
I was just going to say, we put a Bitcoin miner in our welcome center, so we're mining Bitcoin with extra power. So.
Oh my God, there's a whole business model there.
Yeah, that's another. We could talk an hour about that, but it's amazing because of the super efficiency of the solar panels now, and creating this kind of power. So we put in an ant miner that's takes 3,000 watts or whatever. So we can easily handle that for, it doesn't cost that much to put those systems in to do that. And most people are paying so much, they're looking at where their ROI on Bitcoin mining, mostly because of how much power it's taking. Well, our power costs $0. So then everything's gravy. And so it's pretty cool.
Wow. One of the problems is noise, isn't it? Especially in a residential place. But you get ones that you can sink them in oil now, can't you?
Well, ours are, first of all our homes are concrete and steel homes. We're in the tropics. We're not building wood homes. The termites would destroy them in 2 years. So it's pretty hard to hear through a concrete wall that's solid, with rebar and everything. And so in this case, we have a little kind of shed attached to the electrical room of the house, and it's sitting there mining. So.
That's incredible. Wow. Something else I thought of, how's relations with the surrounding area? Do you ever get that kind of them and us type scenario?
No, every country's a little different. For instance, Costa Rica is a little bit different because it's been, a tourist destination for 40, 50 years. Right? So a lot of people bought homes in general in Costa Rica, for instance, and Mexico to some extent, but drove the prices way up, and then the locals feel like, well, this isn't fair to me anymore. Most of the countries haven't had that happen, and there is no angst between the two sides. And we get very involved with the local community. We just put in a solar-powered water well to a little town nearby that didn't have any water. They were still, carrying water on their shoulders like you see in videos in Africa or something from the well a couple miles away to their community. So we put a water well in their community, drilled it, and put in a solar system, and they're just in shock. Nobody's paying for the power for this? It's no, it pumps all day long. We didn't even put batteries on it. We just put a big tank, and it fills the tank up, and the tank now feeds. It's a small community, it's about 50 homes, but they're ecstatic. And we have farmers markets usually on a Tuesday and a Saturday in our communities where the locals can come and sell their stuff too, whether it's the chicken eggs or the corn or whatever it is. So it kind of supplements our own internal gardens and crops as well. So it's pretty, it makes the community, and we're building homes and all the time. So we're creating hundreds, if not thousands of jobs. So they really like us there.
It's one of the things we've been talking a lot about this on the podcast recently, actually. And in my last interview before, you were mentioning this exact thing, which is that if you impact your local community positively, they will support you. And I was thinking, as you mentioned, that your centralized method of energy production didn't work. But when you said it, I thought there's a great opportunity to give free energy to your neighbors there, and they love you. Yeah. But you just did. But I mean, literally run a wire out and say, look, this is free.
Yeah. And we've talked to community residents about this sort of thing too. It's you could net yourselves together, and then you could net one across the street to help the town over there. And, you just you throttle, you get to be the first user and they get to be the second user of the power.
Yeah. So, we forgot to talk about your massive boating trip around the world, which is the bit I actually wanted to talk about. But I'm impressed by what you've been saying about these communities, and actually, I spend a lot of time speaking to people who are looking to get permission to do something similar to what you're doing, but with much more provision for special implementations or whatever. Yeah. And I like the fact that you're actually coming at it from that way. It seems like a much better way to do it, in fact, because it's really happening. You're really there. You're not sitting around twiddling your fingers waiting for someone in an office to say, give you a tick or whatever. But you end up probably getting the result faster, I would imagine, because you've got a proof of concept. And I think this is the thing, like you were saying, approaching a government and saying, hey, look, give me that bit of land and then leave me alone, and you're not allowed to come in. Who in their right mind is going to say, yeah, sure, here?
Well, especially in countries that have been taken advantage of in the past, right? Like in the region in Latin America that we're in, it's very difficult for them to give up sovereignty. And we understand that. And the trade-off is a lot of investment in the country, but it's still not an easy thing to do. So I do believe that we're on the right track by making examples of what happens when you do let expats from around the world come in and invest in your country. They're not trying to change the country. They want to. They're learning. My Spanish sucks, but I still live in these countries for 20 years. But a lot of people that come in do want to improve their Spanish, and they want to blend with the local people, right? It's not like making this little isolated community. So I think it's a great way to show, and we've had many government officials and even presidents of countries come and see the things, and bankers and different local government and industries see these and go, oh, this is cool, right? I don't see the downside to this. So that'll probably make it a lot easier to do our own fully self-governed communities in the future.
Well, we were grokking this out in the last podcast, basically. And Vera, she's our chief economist, she'd written papers on things like this, and she'd come up with 3 major things that you need to sort of secure the physical location of your place. Yeah. And I think these are the first time I've started thinking about it in these terms, but it makes a lot of sense. You've got the legal way, obviously, which is you implement a legal framework, which means that you get left alone. Yeah. And that happens, but in Honduras now we see Prospero basically being challenged on that. That was a very robust legal protection, which is basically being overturned as we speak. We'll see how it turns out. That's one way. Then you've got the ideological way, which is you change the minds of people around you so much that they don't want it shut down. Yeah. And that seems to be the one of the ways you're doing it. And then you've got the economic one, which is everyone's getting so rich and the standard of living is going so much that they don't want to shut it down either. And that's the other. You're doing 2 out of the 3.
Yeah, I guess we're doing 2 out of 3, right? The one, the economic one, is we are one of 2 of the biggest, not only tax producers but job producers in what's called the Chame district. It's like a state if this was in the U.S. or a province in many countries, and we're the biggest provider, of jobs. So yeah, they love it, right? So they're seeing the benefits of it. It's really, like we talked about earlier, it's really hard to go in and talk to the government on a white paper and say this is what it would do and just trust us, right? It's like why would we trust you? We don't know you. But when it's despite the way that we're doing it perfectly legally under the normal governance of the country, it's still not easy to get permits. It's funny because we are completely self-sustainable. For instance, when we first found this property that we were doing in one of the ones in Panama, it was just perfect. Like my son and I looked at each other and it's like, I don't care what they're asking for this. We're buying this property, right? And but as soon as we acquired it, I put a GPS on the roof of my truck and I drove around it was a farm, and I drove around all the farmyards or the farm roads that they had carved in. And I said, I sent that map to our architects and said, these are the roads, just build a community around it and make it really cool. And they did. But I did that because the previous owner was an arborist and had brought trees and different plants from all over the world, and I don't want to cut them down, right? So what normally happens in these countries is developers come in and they do like a scorched earth, everything's down, like right down to the ground. And we're one of 2 communities in the country called green cities, and I'm the furthest thing from a Green New Deal person, right? We do, like I said, our company's called EcoVillages, but we make it very clear that we're eco-sensible and not eco-fanatic. But it's very hard even for their environmental department to understand what we're doing. It's like, what do you mean you didn't cut any trees down? Like, give me a number. Did you cut 800 trees down? It's like, we cut 0. And it's like, you didn't cut zero. And it's like, honestly, we cut 0 trees down to make this community. It's like, well, where are the homes going to go? In between the trees. Right? And so it's just a concept that goes right over their head. And so it actually slowed down our permitting to be more eco-conscious than not. If we had just gone in there and said, okay, there's 3,000 trees on this number of acres, we're taking them all down, we probably would have got our permits faster.
Yeah, you do need to work on the name EcoVillages. The more I think about it, and I did know who you were because I think we've spoken before, haven't we? Yeah. But I didn't know how un-eco-village the persona of
I'm
the
liking
company
that
was.
N that you're throwing in there, the econ village.
No, there's got to be something else. We should throw this.
Our corporate,
Altris.
Altris is the parent company.
But that doesn't speak to me either.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of a vague name. But, ultimately, again, it's funny because it's hard. EcoVillage is a hard name to lose because millions of people go to the Google and they type in EcoVillage.
Yeah.
Like, I want to live
but
in an
they're the wrong
eco-village.
people. You don't want those people.
Strangely enough, they're generally the wrong people.
Yeah. What about freedom villages? That sounds
well, we actually created for another developer, we designed a community called Freedom Village, so it felt like we shouldn't probably steal that
Free
one.
villages, freedom villages.
Free
but that really does. No, I'm doing. I'm a creative sitting here listening to you and thinking, what is your product? And it's like, it's that.
Yeah.
But obviously
true.
the eco part is important, but it's not the founding principle of what you're doing. Exactly. It doesn't seem like it is anyway.
No, I mean, I did a podcast the other day on climate change, what I call climate change obsession, right? Like I'm pretty adamant about how I feel about we're all getting lied to on climate change, right? And whether you like that opinion or not, I don't really care. It is mine. But it's funny how we would talk so much inside our company about what we changed the name to, and ultimately I think we will, because it does have the connotation of we're fanatics, right, on the Green New Deal kind of fanatics, and we are just polar opposite to that. But everybody on the planet wants a clean planet, like they don't want garbage in the oceans, and from that standpoint, we all care about the climate.
But you are environmentally conscious as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But
the solar systems, the wind systems, the energy systems, having our own water, all those sorts of things, first is about economy. Right? Like, I like the fact that I pay $0 for my power. I like the fact that I don't rely on a government grid or a big corporation to provide that to me, that when they want to strangle me of some, freedom, they can just cut off my power or cut off my water. Nobody can do that to us in our community, and that's why we do it. The offshoot of it is it's also very good for the climate. So.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a self-sovereignty thing, isn't it? But even free villages. I mean, we're free cities, aren't we? There's no free villages yet. I'm going to ponder on that one. Look, back to the boating stuff, because that's what I really wanted to talk to you about. First of all, were you a sailor before you decided to do this? And the only reason I ask this is because someone I work with a lot has been watching YouTube channels and stuff about people that live on boats, and without any experience of boats, just gone out and bought a boat. And he's going to do it, and he will be successful because he's that kind of a guy. Yeah. But I did find that interesting that they went over to Amsterdam or whatever to pick this boat up, and the guy had to sail it away for them because they didn't know how to do it, kind of thing,
Get it out of port at least. So don't hit anything on the way.
But I'm not saying that's a bad idea, because I think people will do. I've done crazy stuff myself with no experience, and it's worked out fine. What was your background in sailing?
I grew up in the prairies in Canada, so like about 1 million miles away from an ocean, right? So no, when I was younger, I did not sail. I've had when you grow up on a farm, you had to fix things. You didn't just throw something out and go, buy a new one like we tend to do today with just about everything. But that wasn't a thing when I was growing up in the prairies of Canada. We fixed everything. So I learned, I built my own. I built 2 airplanes. I've crashed them both, but. So I always feel like 2 to 3 is, I should probably not fly another plane. But, we built our own boats. They were more like power boats on lakes and things like that in the prairies. But then when I moved to the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island, and I just wanted to get into sailing, and this was 1998 or something like that. I bought my first sailboat, but I was the same as the guy you're talking about. I just went out and bought a boat, and I was like, I'll figure it out. How hard can it be? And it was a school of hard knocks, I guess, but I learned to sail, and I loved it. And then, as my kids got older and my son was still hanging out with me, that we decided to, we were actually sitting in our home beside the marina, looking out at the boat in the marina and going, why don't we just live on that? Right? Because it's, we're just paying for 2 homes here. And so, and then we'd go out, we'd go out for, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks at a time between Vancouver Island and Alaska. And just, basically there's beautiful spots up there. In fact, just literally 3 weeks ago, my son bought a boat about halfway between Alaska and Vancouver Island. I flew up there and sailed it down with him. It was pretty interesting because we had 2 or 3 days of fog. We're on the open ocean where we couldn't see a thing, couldn't see like the tip of the boat. But it was reminiscent of the good old days. And we learned a lot about, self-sufficiency, and that's really where the bug kind of started to like, I'd love to do this stuff on land. And then people started saying, well, I didn't want to do just like I was saying, like a yurt in the woods. I want to do luxury homes on land that are completely off grid. And people were saying, oh, you can't do that. The systems aren't there yet. And I was like, oh, now you've challenged me. Now I'm going to do it. So we created a community called Milagro Verde in Nicaragua. It's a small community, but Milagro Verde means the green miracle. And at the time, the green term wasn't such a bad term. But so that was the first community. They're 5-bedroom, big homes, 100% off grid. And I really just wanted to prove it could be done. And we did prove it. And beautiful homes, people still live in there and they love their homes. And so then it just decided, well, let's do this bigger in different countries and try different things. And so we designed communities in Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Panama. And now we want to expand into Mexico, Costa Rica, and Argentina, and probably Ecuador as well. So I kind of follow also the politics a little bit. Like Ecuador just got a new president last year who's a capitalist, and they just came out of a socialist nightmare. So, we kind of watch for, are you going to be in president for 1 term and then be gone, or are you going to make it a few terms and change the country? So then we kind of follow that trend too.
Did you, presumably on that trip where you actually left your home to go and live on a boat, was it mainly Central and South America?
No, the boating was all up in, northern, in like the Seattle and north. Right?
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it was like around, the sailors always tell you, if you can sail around Vancouver Island, you can sail anywhere in the world because you get all the weather systems, you get all the, sandbars and, tidal situations, currents and things like that. So in fact, when we were coming home just a few weeks ago, it was pretty hairy from some of the tides and currents that we had to go through, and saw a lot of whales, which was very cool. But so yeah, I mean, it's, it was just more about that. I would say at that time, that was, years ago, but when we were living out like that on a boat, I wasn't as conscious about it was being a freedom-oriented community or a freedom-oriented lifestyle. It just was, right? And I liked the fact that when we were out on the boat, it sounds trivial, but I wasn't paying for my power. I wasn't relying on anybody for my power, and I didn't really put the stuff all together until really, honestly, it was recently when COVID hit, and it was like, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm not following these rules. So my wife and I were literally sitting on an island in Belize when COVID broke out, and she was like, you know what, we need to create a community that is totally self-sufficient from all this stuff. And so we can go there, I can bring my family, you can bring your family, and we have a place to live. And it's like, well, you're describing kind of like a commune, but I think we can make it really cool for everybody. And that's where the Veritas Village concept was born.
Really? So. You've been building these kind of things for 20 years, but not since COVID has they had the ideological
side. The first philosophy came up then.
Right.
Only like 4 or 5 years ago.
Presumably you know all about seasteading.
Yeah.
You do? I was going to say, because when I heard about it, I was that sounds cute. But when I actually ended up speaking, I did a lot of long form conversations with seasteaders. I realized this is for real. Yeah. This is actually for real. This is self-sovereignty. This is really an actionable plan. And I mean, it's already happening. Yeah. It's actually, people are living at sea, like you say, or even on, what do you call it? Luxury liners. They have their own governance. They have, they've got their own flag. They've got all that stuff. It's a market raring to go, and it's just technology catching up with it, as far as I can tell. Yeah. But is that? Have you ever thought down that route, or is it? You're a land person.
Well, I love being on the ocean, and I love what like the ocean builders guys are doing. They're actually in Panama as well. I know Chad and those guys really well. They're doing great things. I just found, like, for our sake, well, my wife, first of all, doesn't want to live on the ocean, so that helped push it back to land. But there's a lot of people. The market for people that want to live in a freedom-oriented community would be bigger on land than out on the water. And it is a bit isolating. Even if you're living on some big ocean liner and you've got your own flag and everything's cool, it's a bit like living on an island, right? You get a bit of island fever. And, that's why we even put our communities, close to towns and places with amenities and things like that. So you don't get that, especially if you're moving to a new country like Panama or Honduras or Nicaragua or whatever. You've got enough culture shock to deal with, then, you don't need to also be isolated from everything too. So,
but I mean, the one of the seasteading concepts, I suppose, would be that there are satellites all over the world that you dock on. So you're still you're a nomad, but you spend 4 months, on Atlas Island or whatever, or even, I mean, I've seen the plans for the really, amazing structural designs for these giant great things that I would have thought I used to think they were science fiction, but they're not at all. Right. And nor is creating a large harbour deep right out at sea. Right. The things like that you can do now if you really had the money and the people. You could go ahead and do that, which was a bit of a shock to me. But I'm kind of with you on that side. I have a very bad relationship with sailing. I've sailed a few times because friends have always. I travel. I kind of mix with those kind of people like you. They'll come sail down to Gibraltar from the UK. Oh, that sounds good. And then, and then the Bay of Biscay, and we're caught up in a net, and it's just like, this is not fun in the slightest. It's actually not even not fun. It's actually scary. Yeah, it's
I've been in some serious storms where and my family was on the boat with me, and I'm just like, everybody down below, take some drugs to knock you out. I'll deal with this up above on the deck. It's not for everybody, for sure.
But ironically, one of the books that's influenced my life the most was a book. It's not like a book you read necessarily. It's a book you look at. It's called Ring of Fire. Have you ever heard of this book?
I don't know.
This guy's there was a couple of brothers, the Blair brothers. Lorne was the main one, and they sailed a big sailing ship around the Ring of Fire, Southeast Asia, through Indonesia, and I don't know how I got hold of that book as a kid, but it was a big book with loads of pictures in it, and I used to just look through it over and over again. I ended up living in Indonesia in later life. I moved there, and
because of the book.
Well, it wasn't. I didn't make the connection, but it was because of the book.
Probably subconsciously.
Yeah, subconsciously, and it was, but. It sort of it shows you the kind of disconnect between what you think happens when you go sailing and what actually happens when you go sailing.
And the pictures are always sunsets and calm waters,
which does happen. We had some I had some great moments.
Yeah, I mean the joy of those moments tend to outweigh the scariness of the other ones, but they're both there. And again, when we're talking about communities, whether it's on land and on water, I have the most admiration for those guys that do it out on the water, and I'm one of them. I'd be out there in a heartbeat. But that's a small percentage of the population that can sort of take that lifestyle. So.
Where do you live yourself then?
That's hard. I have a hard time answering that because I tend to kind of do the circuit between our communities. But most of the time I'm in Panama City because just for connectivity, Panama is a hub in that part of the world. So we used to live, when we started community in Belize, we lived on Ambergris Key. But then you got to take kind of the puddle jumper to another airport, and then from that airport to what I'd call a real airport. And so if you don't have to travel a lot, it's great, right? Some of those island communities are amazing. But when you have to travel as much as I do, then it's nice to be 20 minutes from a major airport.
One of the ideas that I know a lot of people at Prospera dream of in the future is a kind of network of interconnected places like. Almost like franchises, where you have which are connected through governance as well, through, like if you're a bit like having a passport for a Prospera passport, which means you can go to any Prospera around the world.
We have the same concept with the Veritas Villages. It's basically, we call it the Veritas Village Club. So if you're a resident in Veritas Village Coronado, which is one of the communities in Panama, but you want to go to Veritas Village Mexico, you can do that, and you get discounts and perks and all sorts of things of being part of or a place to stay and a lodge there because you're a resident of one of the other ones. So, or if you want to go make wine in the Argentinian vineyard Veritas Village, then you're welcome there. And the nice thing about that is you not only go there, but like with Prospera, you go to a place where people are kind of like-minded, right? You can still speak your mind and not be censored and canceled and enjoy your time while you're there. So.
Do you ever wonder, because I had this conversation with a libertarian, like a community it's called Montelibro. It's very much a grassroots, ground up one. Russian libertarians meeting in Montenegro and basically creating something. But they bought land and they've done all this. And when I looked at it, I wondered what the future of that place might be when other people start coming there. How do you ever notice ideologically that you could basically, the ideology of a place could change, even in the very long term, thinking about having people having children, because their children often rebel against their parents, don't they? Yeah. And I mean, does it matter, number one, or does it something you think about?
It's funny because I don't. It's certainly possible. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, I find that libertarians and freedom-oriented people have pretty strong minds, right? And what I like about, for instance, renting, some people in the community will rent their home on Airbnb or whatever for a couple of weeks. I think it's a good thing. Other people get to come in and see what it's like to live in a Veritas Village. And sometimes when I talk to people, it's like, well, we don't want renters in our community. It's like, well, you do, because you get some fresh blood in here. You get new people to talk to. You get people that are excited. I mean, they're not staying in a Veritas Village without knowing what it's about. Right?
Is that right, though?
Yeah. I mean,
but do they? I don't know.
I mean, I think that most people will Google where they're going, and it would be pretty quick to find out what the type of philosophy we have.
You could call them libertarian villages. Yeah. That might be a bit. Well, Veritas, I'm thinking.
Maybe I'll steal the conference name, Liberty in Our Lifetime Villages.
No, but I wouldn't. I don't know. Like if I was on Airbnb, we're in an Airbnb now. I didn't check to see who owned it.
But if you're staying in a community that has a name like Veritas Village, you'd be like, wonder what this is about. And if you Google Veritas Village, you're going to come up with a lot of libertarian, freedom-oriented stuff.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, and you know what? So what if they're not? Like we're not blocking people, and if they maybe we do a little bit good. Maybe we open their mind up. They come and, like I said, have a glass of wine at sunset in the welcome center, or swimming in the pool, or going to fish in the tilapia pond, and they sit beside a libertarian and they hear a new opinion. So maybe that's not so bad. Right? So.
They'll go away reading Mises and
yeah,
I
exactly.
don't know, whatever. Wow, no, I'm glad you've come this year, because I don't think I would have gone as deep on all this stuff. I think it's a really interesting project. It sounds very well established and very big as well. And I presume you're expanding.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the communities like the one I've been talking about right now is just, the first homes are being constructed in Coronado right now. So the other communities are on an evolutionary path. Like the one in Nicaragua, we're kind of, the latest one in Nicaragua, it's called Playa Pacifica. We're sort of backfilling that into a Veritas Village. We went out and bought a farm. That's a beachfront community. It's hard to grow some stuff on the beach. It's hot. It's got lots of salt spray and everything. So, in our Veritas Village in the Highlands, we grow 50 different fruits and coffee and cacao and all sorts of stuff. And on the beach that's more difficult. So what we did is 5 kilometers inland, we bought a farm, and that belongs then to the people in the beachfront community. And it's not the perfect situation where it's not like you can walk out your door and grab a banana and it's part of the orchard. You have to go somewhere. But because it's reserved for the people in that community, it still does make it a self-sustainable community. So crap hits the fan, they have a very close by farm with everything on it that they need. So.
Has the freedom sort of stuff given you like a bit of a new lease of life? Is it because what I find interesting is that and I know you're not necessarily thinking about it like this, but it's a really good business model offering places for people that are freedom-minded, right? We know that because SEZs are the same. When you create a place like Dubai, everyone wants to go. Well, not everyone, but lots of people want to go there, and it's super successful. And it's you're offering a kind of a bit of a version of that. You're offering people of a certain mentality a place to go, which I don't know how many other people are doing. But is this and I mean, in your case, obviously, it started after COVID, which is also true for a lot of people who are thinking that way now as well. Prior to COVID,
that awakened a lot of people. Not become woke, but awakened a lot of people to what's going on in the authoritarianism of various governments around the world and that whole thing. So yeah, I think. Well, I've been lucky enough with the software businesses that I started in the past and kind of retired early and then was bored and wanted to do something and kind of accidentally got into community development. But I'm very passionate about it now. I mean, I'm as my libertarian blood flowing in my veins kind of got more strong, and then with COVID and those sorts of things going on, and like I said, I'm originally Canadian. It's just hard for me to watch the authoritarian nature of a country that cracks down with the War Act on its own people and freezes bank accounts and stuff like that. We had Canadians that wanted to buy property in our Nicaragua community, and one guy made the mistake of donating to the trucker rally that happened there. I did too, but my money wasn't in Canada, so they couldn't freeze mine. But they froze his bank account for a year and a half. And he had already signed a sales agreement or the purchase agreement of a home.
A year and a half.
And he ended up having to back out of the purchase because they just wouldn't give him the money to send it.
Hold a minute. I know they froze people's bank accounts, but how do you justify freezing someone's bank account? What are they trying to find out for a year and a half?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no justification for it. What I find most frustrating, I guess maybe I take a different tact on this than a lot of people do. I don't expect any better from the government. What I do expect more from is people. And the number of sheep in Canada is very disappointing to me. Like, there's still many people, in fact, I would say the majority of people, unfortunately, that would back that whole freezing of bank accounts and, cracking down on the truckers rally and things like that. And mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and all those sorts of things today. Like, they would do it again. And that's what scares me. And I think, you talked about, the popularity of what we're doing. And we saw about 3,000 to 4,000% increase of like web traffic and people interested in our communities, during and after COVID. And it's been steady. It's not let up. It's gotten more and more. So people obviously expect something else is coming and want that plan B or plan A in a lot of cases. But it's just, it's disappointing as a Canadian. It's not the Canada I grew up in, and
Have you got any thoughts or opinions on why this is happening?
Well, I think ultimately it's a power grab of some sort. I don't know. Like, I'm constantly considered a conspiracy theorist, right? and it is what it is. I don't really care, but there is some, it's like watching Biden or Kamala in the U.S. They're not the ones running the country. Like, somebody else is. I don't know who that is, but somebody else is, and we probably can all have our own guess of who the quote unquote elites are that are doing this. But I think these events are to create fear, and I think like I said earlier, the most likely next fear event is just based around climate change and the obsession around that. Well, again, coming back to Canada, they've got a carbon tax that's killing the economy, and people are like accepting it. They shouldn't pay it, as far as I'm concerned. They just shouldn't pay it. You get enough people to go, no, that's not a thing. We're not going to do it. I mean, on top of, like I was saying, 60 to 70% taxes that I was paying back then. You add this, I mean, it's just crippling the country. So it's mind-boggling to me that people will take this. It's a little bit. I would say that in the freedom world that you and I live in, there's probably in my estimate, it's probably about 7 or 8% of the population that kind of has been awakened to things going on, and everybody's probably got their own little version of what that means, but aren't just going, oh, the government's got my best interest at heart, and that sort of naive position. But
Do you have an opinion then on that 9-10%-ish that you just spoke about? Because there's two schools of thought here. One is we need to convince everyone, and the other is actually you can never convince everyone. It's probably 20% or 10% in your case or whatever. What school of thought are you there?
Yeah, I think maybe when I was younger, I was a convince everyone kind of guy, and I've come to the point of, and like I look at our Veritas villages as when crap hits the fan in the world, people need places to go. And, we can't create them fast enough. We can't create them big enough for the, if it is 10% of the world's population that goes, hey, I want to go there, we're never going to be big enough to handle 10% of the population. But the people that are making that choice now to have that plan A or plan B will be able to go there. And so I think, like, if you look at, well, we could have a whole nother conversation. I think we're looking at the fall of an empire. Right? I think the U.S. Western world is going to collapse, just like the Greek, the Roman, the Ottoman, the British empires. There's 4 or 5 things that always cause the collapse of empires, and most of those are happening with the U.S. right now, and they'll take everybody down with them. Anybody that's relying on U.S. dollars and that sort of thing. So we're just creating these little oases around the world or around Latin America to start, of places for people to go. I've stopped trying to convince everybody. I find it, frankly, exhausting. And I think, there's just some people, people in my family that just think I'm a lunatic, that I even think like this, and they're just 110% behind the government and go. And there's no change in their mind.
Do you think there was ever a reason to be behind the government? This is the thing, though. Are we living through unusual times now?
That's an amazingly interesting question to me, because I don't think so. I think there's things that have happened, like the internet and and just general global communication, that makes it a little bit easier to spot how crazy governments are and how authoritarian they are, and the whole trajectory that things are going. I think, when Atlas Shrugged was written or whatever, that was a tougher position to take at the time than it is today. And there were a lot fewer people in the percentage-wise, I would think, even though the population was lower, percentage-wise, fewer people that kind of were awake to that kind of stuff. And I think a lot, the internet, for all its bad stuff, at least we can, communicate about this kind of stuff. Like Liberty in our lifetime can have a conference and we can find people around the world that feel the same way, whereas that would have been very difficult to do 30, 40 years ago. So I think to some degree, it's just a pendulum swing. It's continually happened from the dawn of time. It's human nature, power, money, it's just human nature to try to control everything. And, freedom is a very honorable thing to fight for, but very difficult to hang on to. And I, as a Canadian growing up, we always, it was funny because you're the little brother of the U.S. to the north. And, we were kind of taught that you should just kind of laugh at the Constitution of the U.S. They were overly patriotic. It was crazy. We'd go to this, when I was a kid, we'd go to this thing called a Passion of the Christ. It was like a reenactment of the Easter story, right? It was on the southern side of the border. It was in the U.S. And at the end where Christ stood, they put the American flag, right? And my parents would, say, "Oh, this is where patriotism goes a little too far," right? And I was kind of learned that the Constitution's a bit of a joke, and now I'm just a huge fan of the American Constitution that put freedom of speech at the top of the list, and then guns to protect it second on the list, right? So it's interesting that it's so sad to see the Western Empire being ripped apart like it is with today's woke ideologies and people hating, like, I don't know, it's kind of crazy. It's like, this will be off on the political incorrectness side, but, I saw transgenders for Hamas sign in a parade the other day, and another guy was joking about it. It's like chickens for KFC. It's like, so.
But, I mean, we laugh, but it's a really, I find it hard to get my head around sometimes, because it's very hard to think those thoughts. It's not easy to think those thoughts. If you have any degree of critical thinking, it's not easy to think those thoughts. And it just shows you how possible it is. And I think I've been on a similar journey to you, even with the US. I didn't understand the Constitution until recently. Yeah. And now I'm like, holy shit, that's an incredible bit of technology. It's like a bit of technology, isn't it?
Written by like 18 to 22-year-olds.
Right.
It's amazing.
But it really works.
Yeah.
It's caused this group of people to unite over something. I mean, and we can learn a lot from that in the Free Cities Foundations. It's like, this is how
There's a governance that's worked for 300
exactly.
years. Right?
But it's also, this is a way to really keep people doing the same thing, because it takes that, like I say, it's one of those three things. If people are on board with the idea, they'll fight for it.
Yeah.
And it's decentralized. The idea is just there.
Well, and freedom is difficult. Freedom is hard to fight for it, and like my wife's from Ecuador, and she grew up in a socialist/communist environment. And she said, it's just easier for people. Like, it's not human nature to get paid the same thing or do the same rewards for different levels of work. So that's why socialism, in my opinion, never works. Right? Eventually, it breaks apart. But in the beginning, it's just easier. It's like, the government's going to take care of me. I'm going to give everything I've got to the government, and they're just going to give me exactly what I need back. And that's a very easy way of life. Like, for those people that don't have strong characters and want to do something with their lives, that's just like, I'm a 9-to-5 guy, and I'm just going to keep doing this till I die, and that's it, right? And it's an easy way of life. The way the U.S. was founded on freedom is not an easy way of life. You constantly got to fight for that, and they're, unfortunately, I think, kind of losing the battle right now. But this next generation, but it's the same thing. Like, weak men create, weak societies. Weak societies create strong men. Blah blah blah, and you go through that cycle. And I think we're just in the middle of that, unfortunately, creating weak men right now.
So what do you think the new strong, the societies will be created by the strong men? And
well, I think,
strong people.
I think if you look at the BRICS or the BRICS countries, they're just looking at the U.S. and laughing right now. I mean, if you're China and you're watching the falling of, all the woke ideology is just destroying the country. And I think it's probably, I don't think there's going to be a third world war like we tend to think of it in terms of military. I think, there's already the war going on underneath. How much farmland in the U.S. is owned by China? What happens with the U.S. and Western civilization when the U.S. dollar collapses, which is inevitable at this point. To be printing money beyond, it doesn't matter if Trump gets in or Kamala gets in, it's over. At some point, I think maybe a 30 to 50 year span left before the empire collapses. So that's how much time, in my mind, we have to fix things, right? In other areas, I don't think, like, there's people creating freedom-oriented towns or communities in the U.S. I think that's a losing battle. Like, you can't do that where the entire country is going to go down. So.
Okay, so that you're not a stay-at-home and fight kind of guy. You're like, no, go and create the new thing and let people opt into it. Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to, say anything bad about the stay-at-home and fight folks. Like, I think that's a very honorable thing, and I hope they get it right. But even, like, I look at for our communities, we're going to have another wave of people after this coming election, and it doesn't matter who wins. If Kamala wins, then it's just, everybody that's center and right of center is going to go, I would like to have a plan B. And if Trump wins, we're going to see mostly peaceful protests again with, Chicago burning down and, people going, I got to get out of here. And at some point...
Same people as well. Same people that want to get out of there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But so, and it's the same in Canada. We have Trudeau against Poilievre in the next election there. The same kind of liberal versus conservative side. And I'm right down the middle as a libertarian. I don't side with Trump or Kamala or Poilievre or Trudeau, but I think a lot of people are putting a lot of weight in Poilievre if he wins in Canada as a conservative, that he's going to fix everything. And people are putting a lot of weight in Trump, and he's going to fix everything. I don't think it's in their control. Like I said, I mean, whether you believe in the elites or some group out there that's running the world, basically, they can only maybe slow it down a little bit at best. But I think the woke ideology is taking control in the West, and it's going to be impossible to stop.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean, especially about Trump. Trump is now the savior of humanity almost. It's been amazing to watch the change. What is interesting about him, though, is he's universally disliked by the people that you don't like. Universally. There's not a single one. And that's a good sign as far as I'm concerned, because I don't think in normal political cycles it doesn't happen like that. Yeah. But he is hated because he's not part of the political cycle, and that's not to say that he won't be absorbed into it, because it kind of happened. Interestingly, did you watch his thing with Joe Rogan the other day? He did.
I watched parts of it. Yeah.
I got through the first bit, and he was talking about what happened when he first got into power. It was quite enlightening. Because he had to employ 10,000 people, right? Yeah. And he ended up.
He admits he made mistakes.
Right, exactly. but that was a good sign for me, because that showed me that he really wanted to employ people that were going to change the system. But in the end, the system got hold of him. But the point was, he did go in with that attitude. Yeah. And politicians don't tend to go in with that attitude. Yeah. They actually go in.
Maybe this time, if he wins, then he'll have he'll have the benefit of hindsight, right? Well, I'm actually a fan of Trump's policies. I think he's a bit of a goof, but policies-wise, and if his handlers could keep him off Twitter for a while, it would probably help his cause. But I mean, I have my theory on what happens if Harris wins, and what's already been happening for sure the last 4 years with the open borders on the south of the U.S. I did my research on this, and I noticed that a lot of the people from outside of the U.S. don't understand often the importance of swing states, right? and so the U.S. has its 50 states, and about 6 or 7 of them are the ones that really matter. The rest of California is always going to be liberal, and Texas is always going to be conservative, and that goes for most of the states in the U.S. But 6 or 7 of them will flop back and forth, and so the candidates always go after those. Well, interestingly enough, when you go see the statistics on where all this migration that's coming through the southern border has, and now it's not just like Latin Americans coming through there, it's Africa and all over the world, Congo. And Trump made the mistake of saying once that they're not sending their best and brightest, but he's right. I mean, I live in these Latin American countries, Honduras and Venezuela, for instance. They opened their gates, they opened the penitentiary doors and said, you've got like a couple options. One is if we catch you again, you're going back to jail, or we're shooting you. Or I would recommend you go to the U.S. border, because they're letting everybody through. So it's the penitentiaries that have been open. So it's definitely not the best and the brightest that are going across the border. And they're not going because it's so horrible in their country. They're going because they see $17 an hour minimum wage, and that's just in their eyes. That's like manna from heaven. But a lot of these folks are getting shipped into the swing states, right? And where are they going to vote for? They're going to vote for the government that allowed them in, and is going to got to win the next election, because they want to allow their family in too, right? They want to bring the rest of their friends and family. And what does that mean? That means that, I think Elon Musk said it. He said there's not going to be another election. I would say it a little differently. There's not going to be another meaningful election. Because once they've converted all the swing states to the Democratic Party, Kamala's party, the next election doesn't matter. The Republicans can never win anymore, and it's going to be a one-party state, the whole U.S. And so I think this election is extremely important from that standpoint. I don't think it's going to change the world, but I do think it's going to change whether, at least in this next 4 years, we have a one-party state in the U.S. or two-party states. So there's, the little bit of balance that the U.S. has would usually fluctuate back and forth between Republican and Democrat, and I don't think it ever will again if the Democrats get it, because they'll just keep doing the same thing. They'll push them into the state that will always vote for them, and they'll own the swing states, and then there's no chance the other side can win.
How do you deal then with the political cycle in the countries that you're building in? Like, is it, you said you take it into account when you're building something new, but obviously that's 4 to 8 years or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but the trend is definitely longer. Like, I've looked at the kind of 20-year trends. The nice, also not so nice thing about building in Latin America is many of the countries in Latin America have been socialist or communist in the past and learned their lesson, right? They don't want to be there again. So if if you know, there's some graphs out there, I've seen that, in 2002 or something, all these countries were socialist, and then you look now and 80% of them are capitalist, right? So they've switched, and they don't want to go back to that. They're becoming more educated too. One of the things that socialist governments tend to do is keep everybody uneducated, because if you just think, okay, I'm going to get my loaf of bread then from the government, that's great, right? So we're doing what we're doing with the community building in that region, partly because we see it going the right direction. The crime is going down, socialism and communism leaving and being replaced with capitalism. And so we're really focused in that area, whereas we kind of see the opposite direction in a lot of, Europe and in North America.
So you've got basically one generation, haven't you?
Yeah.
Well, that's how.
Yeah.
I think it gets forgotten in a generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not very long anymore, really, is it? One generation.
No, well, I mean, I think if you look at the U.S. society right now, there's so many similarities to Germany in the 30s, and you think, how can you forget this? Right? Like, how can
They've even got a fascist in Donald Trump, haven't they?
Yeah.
Which is,
well, they call him a fascist is retarded.
Exactly. But it's really interesting to see that trope being pumped out.
Yeah, especially in the last week.
I've noticed
this is our last Hail Mary for the election.
But the thing is, mate, it works because it worked. You remember? Well, you wouldn't have known this one. Well, you probably would. The weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, absolutely.
That worked.
Yeah.
That was just said so many times that people started believing it. And sure, if you're a thinking person, you look at Trump and most people have the same opinion as you. Bit of a buffoon, but he's got a good heart. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and actually he's a businessman.
Yeah.
But so if you're calling him a fascist, you've got absolutely no critical thought process going on at all.
Or you don't know what a fascist is.
Well, exactly. Maybe they've redefined the word fascist. But they're just saying it over and over again now. Yeah. And they even talked about one of his rallies being similar to a Nazi rally or something. It was just like, come on.
I know, it's the polar opposite. It's the other party that I'd worry about. But, it's funny because when was it? I guess around 2002, or when the whole weapons of mass destruction thing was going on, right after the 9/11. But I was in Nicaragua, and, I was flying down from, make a long story short, I was flying. This is my experience with mainstream media, that was the day that opened up my mind that mainstream media just lies, and like blatantly lies. I had no idea. I thought I was watching journalism up until that day. But I was going to the Vancouver airport in Canada, and there was a transportation strike. So the cab drivers and the bus drivers were on strike, and there was a bridge to get over to the airport. And a cab driver stopped on one end of the bridge and said, "Do you mind just walking over to the other side? And I'll radio a guy and he'll pick you up on the other side." I said, "Yeah, no problem. I'll walk across the bridge, get to the airport, go to Nicaragua, land in Managua, go towards the property, and I'm heading to, same thing. They're having a transportation strike. I'm like, where is this, worldwide transportation strike? And so I get to the one side, and he's the same thing. It's like, I don't want to be a scab. You gotta walk across here, and if you don't mind, I'll tell a guy on the other side to pick you up. As I'm walking across, there's these guys roasting hot dogs over a barrel and having Toña, which is a great Nicaraguan beer. And they call me over and say, "Hey, you want to have a beer and a hot dog?" And it's like, "Yeah, absolutely." So we're roasting hot dogs over a barrel in with the striking guys here, in the transportation strike guys. And there's these two brothers, like 16 and 15 years old, fighting in the ditch. And I'm asking, like, what's up with those guys? And he's like, "Oh, they both like the same girl." And it's like, "Oh, does she get a choice in this, or is that the winner take all? How does this work?" And they're laughing, but there's just two brothers, right? And so I look over, and there's a CNN crew there. And they're panning, and they see me, the white guy there. They go over top of me and down into the ditch, and they're filming those guys. And they're just brothers brawling like brothers do. I don't think anything of it. I get back to the U.S. I'm going through the Houston airport in Texas on my way home to Canada at the time, and this story comes up on the TV in the airport, and it's just like sensationalized, like, people are dying in the streets in Nicaragua, and they literally show that scene where they had to go up into the trees with the camera to avoid showing me, and they're showing these two brothers that I was watching in the ditch fighting over a girl, and saying that they died, and it was like this is the anarchy going on in Nicaragua. And I was like, oh man, like, I can't believe anything anymore. This is just, they had nothing to sell on this story, so they just made it up. And it was like, that was eye-opening for me.
That was, well, it's a commonly known meme now, but never has it been as real as it is now, that once the news reports on something you actually know about, you realise that everything's probably reported on the same way.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, I had my own version of that with Trump when he spoke at the Bitcoin conference. And I realised he didn't know what he was talking about. And it was entertaining nevertheless. Yeah. But then I'd kind of watched a few other of his speeches, and I just thought he was quite a good speaker. And now I realise he's just a bullshitter. I don't mind, but he was really bullshitting
You got to pick the least of the bullshitters. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I used to work in that. I worked for a national newspaper for like 7 years in the UK. And it was The Independent as well, which was, they called themselves an independent but they were just as kind of ideologically captured as everyone else without realizing it. That was the thing. I don't mind ideological capture. I just like it to be overt.
Yeah, just be open about it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, fabricating the news is. I didn't see much of that. It didn't work that way when we were working. It worked in as much as the stories we were told to focus on. But
this CNN crew in Nicaragua was there to show that Nicaragua was a bad place, and they couldn't leave without that story, so they had to make it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Have they given in to the El Salvador thing yet? Have they capitulated or not? Because
from a Bitcoin perspective,
no, from a Bukele perspective, because he's portrayed as a very dangerous man by certainly the American media.
Yeah, which one, Bukele or Ortega?
No, Bukele. Bukele.
Okay. Yeah, I know. It's kind of, good on him for putting the shields up and going, I'm going to do this regardless. It's hard to not acknowledge the outcome. Right? I mean, they've literally surpassed countries like Canada in terms of safety, from a country that was first or second in the world most dangerous. In a couple of years they did that. So it's right or wrong how he did it. It seems to be right to me. And he put just about every gang member. In fact, just in the last couple of days, he did that again. It's like he's not stopping till he's got every last one in jail. And I'm personally okay with that. I was lucky spending time in Nicaragua. Nicaragua is right beside El Salvador, but had such a difference. It was one of the safest, still is one of the safest countries in all of Americas. And that was because they had basically the equivalent of I don't know where you grew up, where I grew up, there was a neighborhood watch type of thing, right? And basically in the Latin American culture, like grandma's the boss, right? So if she says like, you're not having a gang in my town, the kids couldn't form gangs, right? And then government did something, at least at the time, that was wise, is they made everybody and their cousin a police officer. So it was like, we got to create jobs. So let's just make everybody a cop. And so there was all these cops, there was the neighborhood watch, and gangs never took any foothold whatsoever in Nicaragua. So their crime stayed at like 2.2 homicides per 100,000 people, where El Salvador was like 170, right? So it was just radically different, right beside each other. And now they're very similar in terms of very little crime in either country.
Do you hear any good arguments against what Bukele's done?
Well, not in my opinion. None of them are good. Like I said, I think he's an amazing. The fact that he's alive, I think, is quite astounding.
That's true. That's very true. Not even been any attempts on his life, have there?
It's strange because you're not playing against the softest guys.
Did he hit them that hard?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that why it's happened? Do you think they just literally?
I think they got caught off guard. I mean, like and his ability to somehow convince the military that this is worth doing. Like,
that they can even do it.
Yeah, I would have said, like, 5 years ago, I would have said the Salvadorian gangs are stronger than the military. Yeah. So how, they haven't been able to do that so much in Mexico, right? Where it's like, it's still an ongoing battle. But look, a lot of the presidents around the country, like Daniel Noboa now in Ecuador, was dealing with the same stuff, kind of took the page out of Bukele's book, and they're making the same moves. Milei and Argentina didn't have the crime that Salvador did, but unfortunately, as Venezuela fell apart due to its communism problem, a lot of their crimes spread out too. So it hit, Colombia, which was getting cleaned up, and Ecuador, which is, always quite safe, and and now it's affected those countries. So now they're also seeing, they purposely elect a guy like Noboa in Ecuador because he's a lot like Bukele. He's young, he's dynamic, he wants to make a change, and he's not afraid to take on the forces out there, and good on those guys for staying alive, frankly.
And the thing about Bukele is you often see him just walking around and stuff. I'm really surprised that there hasn't been an attempt on his life, at least.
Yeah, like I agree with that. Like, I mean, his popularity is the highest the president has ever had in the world. When he went for a re-election last time, I think he was at 96%. And like, you just don't see those kind of numbers anywhere. So obviously among the people, he's not afraid, but all these gang members, now he did some interesting things, like, of course the UN and everybody was saying that, it's against human rights, but I'm sorry, I'm on his side. If the gangs killed anybody, the gang leaders that were in jail didn't get fed for a couple of days. So every time they would kill somebody, the guys in jail were starving. And it's like, I don't personally care if that's human rights violation. These guys did way worse things to people than miss a few days of food. So, but that really seemed to work, and I was kind of surprised at it. Like, they were basically telling their underlings, don't kill anybody right now because I need to eat.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, the only argument is that there are some people, some people imprisoned unlawfully, possibly.
Absolutely. And
I don't know what you do about that.
It's kind of like war to me. It's like, unfortunately, there's casualties of war that is, if you could fight a perfectly clean war, I guess that would make it better, but that's just impossible. I mean, if you look at what Israel is going through right now and that area, it's like, what's the right thing to do? I certainly not the guy to solve these problems, but I think, it's funny because even when you have a 96% approval rating and you've caught some non-criminals in your net, well, it must, a lot of those family members probably have somebody that they think is innocent that's in jail right now and probably aren't very happy with the system. But to have that level of popularity, even those folks must be saying, well, sucks that John's in jail, but man, this country's so cleaned up, and we'll get him out. We'll fight a legal battle to get him out, and there's a lot of that going on behind the scenes. We met with El Salvadorian lawyers and stuff like that, and they admit that there's people caught in the net that shouldn't be, but that the government has actually been quite willing to sit down and listen and release people that have an actual track record that they weren't. It was also fairly easy, right? They all tattooed themselves with.
Exactly.
So it was,
I'm not sure. Yeah, that was what I suppose something that a lot of people worry about is if Bukele is taken away or taken out, what happens to the country? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would. There's always that risk, right? That that he's kind of a one-man show, right? And that if he was gone, the socialist forces would kind of move back in and take over.
Well, even the gang forces.
The gang forces. But I'd like to believe that they've seen such a change in their country for the better that the next guy that if Bukele didn't want to be reelected or was unfortunately assassinated or something like that, that the next person coming in would get elected based on the same kind of principles.
Yeah, it's an astonishing story. We went there I took my family there to my wife's dismay. She didn't know actually until we were kind of going into the country that there was a state of emergency at the time. And I said, look, you're going to have to trust me on this one because I'm speaking to people in the country who are telling me this. And, by the time we left, we stayed there for a couple of months because I wanted to just try out Bitcoin. Yeah. I wanted to be there for it. I wanted to just be there in solidarity almost, And it made sense as well because there weren't any restrictions, COVID restrictions either. Right. And by the time we left, she loved the place. Yeah. And because it's got such a great vibe. Especially if you like, hanging out on beaches in little shacks, it's got that vibe for real. Yeah. And it was just such a great 2 months. One of my favorite 2 months of my sort of recent life, I think, Yeah,
and all the countries there have a little bit different vibe to them, but all have that similar sort of feel. Like, when I first started going down to Nicaragua, all my friends were like, your kids are going to get kidnapped, and it's like, no, I don't think so. I've done some research on this, and now my kids, it's one of their favorite countries in the world, and they've lived there, they've spent time there, and Salvador is another one that they just love, and so it's really expanded their world too when they were growing up. Different currencies, different language, different culture, and it's been great. Now my kids travel more than I do, and they're not afraid to go anywhere. So I think it really opened their eyes that when they see on the news that, Nicaragua is a dangerous place, and then they go there and they see some of the friendliest people on the planet, and we go anywhere. And my daughters were like, I don't know, 14 and 16 at the, for a while when we were still going there, and they'd take, a vehicle and drive around, and if they got a flat tire, I knew the people would come, out of the villages and fix the tire for them, and I was so much safer than even driving around. Like, I wouldn't want them driving around like that in Canada, but in Nicaragua, I was perfectly comfortable with it because I just had experience for many years, just no issues. Right? So.
Last question, because we've been talking. I could talk for ages about South America.
Sorry if I extended your...
No. I like talking about... I don't know a huge amount about South America, but I traveled for years, and it's mainly been Asia, Southeast Asia, that side of the world. South America was something I'd only ever traveled for work, not for play, until recently, and now you can see it's like something going on there. There's a vibe. There's a lot of people, especially in these kind of communities, talking about it as a place that's kind of on the up and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm really happy to talk about it and just glean information because you spend a lot of time there. Have you got any aspirations to make any, eco cities, or is it EcoVillages? Well,
definitely, working very closely with Titus and Alex and the group on. We've been traveling to a lot of different countries, and them on their own and them with me sometimes, and trying to find the right place. I can't say too much about it right now, but there's some interesting things happening. It's in conjunction, but right, okay. No, Tipolis is obviously the masters at governance, and that sort of thing, and we have a proven track record of building. So I think it's we don't really. Our Venn diagram overlaps a little bit, but not much. We're kind of very complementary. So, but I suppose what I meant was personally, does that kind of thing interest you? Because there's a big difference between an eco-village and an eco-city, isn't there? It's a very different undertaking. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the long-term goal would be to make larger places for people to go. And as we sort of talked about in the beginning, these eco-community, freedom-oriented villages that we're creating now, the Veritas villages, are really to show, they are a thing unto themselves, and they'll be an amazing, places to live for everybody that lives there. But it's also partly to show governments what can be done, and that these things can be great for the country, not only for the people that come in, and bring in a ton of investment dollars. And it's another reason why we kind of enforce that the businesses that are within our communities must accept Bitcoin. As far as I know, we're currently the only community builder and developer in that region that also accepts Bitcoin, for the homes. If you want to buy a home in one of our communities, you can use Bitcoin. Autris, our public company, holds at minimum 20% of our assets in Bitcoin. We live by it, right? So, phenomenal! Wow, I'm really happy that you've come to speak here. I probably wouldn't have dived as deep otherwise. I'm sorry if I took up a lot of your morning. No, not at all. This is how we do it here. We get 3-hour slots, three 3-hour slots throughout the day. But thanks for coming, Patrick. I really enjoyed speaking about all this stuff, and very best wishes and good luck for the future. It sounds like it's really happening, and I love the fact that you're building them. It's phenomenal. I agree now, thinking it through, I think that's the best way to go, is to build and then step by step, arrive at the goal the main goal, I hope that's the right way. We're putting everything into it, and I really appreciate the time here, Tim, to speak with you. And there are going to be some very cool announcements in the next few months that I can't really talk about right now. But this is definitely going in the right direction for freedom-oriented places to be. So.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to speaking to you in another few months then. Let's have an update. But thanks for coming in and good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time, Tim.